I want to read to you a very good passage from a book by Alexis de Tocqueville called Democracy in America. I want to share this passage because I think it shares an idea that more people should hear about. It's an illuminating passage, and it makes one reconsider what it means to be free in a so-called free society in a country like America, and in countries that in many ways are politically similar to the United States, although not perfectly. That is to say, in any society where majority opinion seems to be the basis for truth and goodness. How many of you think that something isn't right unless the majority says it is? Something isn't. Someone doesn't have political legitimacy unless the majority says it's okay. A law should not be passed unless the majority want it. You shouldn't make a decision as a group unless the majority want it. You might find a truth claim, then you say, well, what did the majority of people who have contributed to this conversation say? For some people, that is an instinct they have for verifying things in this manner. But what if it were the case that this is a premise that doesn't really mean anything? It says nothing about the goodness or the truth of something if the majority of people believe in it. Science has certainly not been, scientific truths throughout world history have not been embraced by the majority. A lot of things you simply cannot leave up to majority opinion, particularly in a hyper propagandized society like the one we have today. So we live in a world where we kind of contain these ambivalent, double think sort of ideas, where on one hand you can convince a person that, remember to be skeptical of the majority. Human beings tend to always be wrong about things. On another hand, you also can uphold the fetish of majority opinion and point to it as so important and so good. This is a person who stands for the majority. These are policies that will help the majority. Here's an approach to, creating a piece of art that will ensure that the majority likes it. There's somebody who spoke about this quite well, found in the person of Alexis de Tocqueville. He was a French aristocrat who traveled abroad to the United States, I think in 1930, not 1930, pardon me, 1830. Very important that I specify that. This was not so recent. Nevertheless, what he has to say is very important. Now, this is a French aristocrat. Of course, his perspective is going to be an outsider's, but that allows him to make pretty original statements on the culture of the United States in 1830. And I'm just going to read this passage, and we're going to go through it. And I'll probably stop and comment on some of the things in here because it's pretty deep. It's dense stuff. It's a lot of valuable ideas packed into each paragraph. So let's check it out. All right. This is from a section called Power Exercised by the Majority in America Upon Opinion. The chapter itself is, in my version, chapter 15 of one of these books. The different versions you get are going to be split up into different, methods of organizing. So, I'm pretty sure this is just book one of volume one. Yeah, okay, book one of volume one. Other people, it would be like a second book is starting. So this is chapter 15, um, entitled Unlimited Power of the Majority in the United States and Its Consequences. So, power exercised by the majority in America upon opinion. Let's go. It is in the examination of the display of public opinion in the United States that we clearly perceive how far the power of the majority surpasses all the powers with which we are acquainted in Europe. Intellectual principles exercise an influence which is so invisible and often so inappreciable that they baffle the toils of oppression. At the present time, the most absolute monarchs in Europe are unable to prevent certain notions which are opposed to their authority from circulating in secret throughout their dominions and even in their courts. Such is not the case in America as long as the majority is still undecided. Discussion is carried on. But as soon as its decision is irrevocably pronounced, a submissive silence is observed, and the friends, as well as the opponents of the measure, unite in assenting to its propriety. The reason of this is perfectly clear. No monarch is so absolute as to combine all the powers of society in his own hands, and to conquer all opposition with the energy of a majority which is invested with the right of making and of executing laws. The authority of a king is purely physical, and it controls the actions of the subject without subduing his private will. But the majority possesses a power which is physical and moral at the same time. It acts upon the will as well as upon the actions of men, and it represses not only all contest, but all controversy. So there we have illuminated the stakes of majority opinion as being, a legal basis for a society. So he speaks in, there's a counterintuitive explanation that if you live under a monarchy and you embody a perspective that falls outside of the scope of power's consensus, you're okay. Nothing really stops you from holding that private will, and the government is not so absolute and powerful as to prevent you from holding these beliefs and organizing and creating communities that fall outside of the purview of the government. In the United States, there's what much greater stake on what the majority ought to think, and the basis for government, because it is founded upon the will of the people. Every person is seen as participating in this governmental statewide discourse. So when something is determined by the majority, that's it. The law has spoken, the sovereign has spoken. And if you're a part of the sovereign body, like, a member of a body politic, if you're just some person who holds an opinion that deviates from what is popular, nevertheless, your mind is your mind is a part of the sovereign. So if the community has decided something that you don't agree with, too bad. It's been decided for you, buddy. Don't question it. And there's, I suppose, greater threat in trying to contest with a popular opinion, because in that sense, you're contesting with the basis of the government. You disagree with the people. You disagree with the people. Well, that's political. That's dangerous. And there's, ways in which this can hurt a person that aren't, so that are not, for example, that a person is executed for holding an opinion. So in our society, you can, in theory, hold private beliefs and whatnot. The government can't kill you for saying something it dislikes. The people cannot do that to you. But there are other ways that this harms a person. So we'll see what he has to say. We'll move on. I know of no country in which there is so little true independence of mind and freedom of discussion as in America. Wow, that's pretty bad. In any constitutional state in Europe, every sort of religious and political theory may be advocated and propagated abroad, for there is no country in Europe so subdued by any single authority as to not contain citizens who are ready to protect the man who raises his voice in the cause of truth from the consequences of his hardihood. If he is unfortunate enough to live under an absolute government, the people is upon his side. If he inhabits a free country, he may find a shelter behind the authority of the throne if he requires one. The aristocratic part of society supports him in some countries and the democracy in others. But in a nation where democratic institutions exist, organized like those of the United States, there is but one sole authority, one sole element of strength and of success, with nothing beyond it. In America, the majority raises very formidable barriers to the liberty of opinion. Within these barriers, an author may write whatever he pleases, and he will repent it if he ever step beyond them. Not that he is exposed to the terrors of an auto da fe, but he is tormented by the slights and persecutions of daily obloquy. My dumbass said obloquy, but it's obloquy. His political career is closed forever since he has offended the only authority which is able to promote his success. Every sort of compensation, even that of celebrity, is refused to him. Before he published his opinions, he imagined that he held them in common with many others, but no sooner has he declared them openly than he is loudly censured by his overbearing opponents, whilst those who think without having the courage to speak like him abandon him in silence. He yields at length, oppressed by the daily efforts he has been making, and he subsides into silence, as if he was tormented by remorse for having spoken the truth. So here we have illustrated the counterintuitive aspects that it has on freedom of expression when you defer to the majority as the basis for political legitimacy. Um, there are all kinds of indirect social consequences that result from this. For example, a person who speaks an unpopular truth will probably be abandoned by that society. Um, and yes, and there's certain things that he just does not get within the free society. And this may not, think of the stakes. He is saying this in relation to like all of the potential cultural output of a state. Great philosophers, great thinkers, geniuses who tend to be, who really tend to push things in a way that could possibly destabilize the society. Why is it hard for, um, why would it be hard for a person like that to receive benefit in a society like America? And I can't go over the full litany of possible geniuses America has produced throughout time, but my hunch is that the U.S. is in many ways. I mean, it typically just isn't. It's not the cultural engine that Europe has been. We have some strong thinkers. William James. Noam Chomsky's in the news. He was in the news recently. He is not turned to as a. He's. I think he's fine. There's some political news stuff surrounding Chomsky, but he's considered very intelligent. He's famous. I'm not so familiar with his contributions to linguistics, which are what his field of specialty and whatnot. But he's considered pretty smart, I guess. There's a guy named Kripke or something like that. I think I pronounced that right. I don't know anything about his work. I came across him years ago, and then I designated him to his last name in my brain. Emerson. I mean, this is a whole separate conversation, but we don't have, like, you can't point to specifically, Isaac Newton. We can't even take credit for Einstein, even when he came here. We don't have Da Vinci, we don't have Mozart, we don't have Machiavelli, we don't have Pascal, we don't have Nietzsche, we don't have much. Anyways, but this isn't just something that would affect even the great artists and thinkers and whatnot, but everyday people. There's not a culture that can really be cultivated that permits people to say unpopular things without incurring massive social costs, even if it isn't like execution or going to prison. Okay. Yeah, and then there's an alienation that comes. I think a lot of people can relate to this. Fetters and headsmen were the coarse instruments which tyranny formerly employed, but the civilization of our age has refined the arts of despotism which seemed, however, to have been sufficiently perfected before. The excesses of monarchical power had devised a variety of physical means of oppression. The democratic republics of the present day have rendered it as entirely an affair of the mind as that which it is intended to coerce. That sounded weird in my brain, so I'm going to read that sentence again. Let's see. The excesses of monarchical power had been devised. The excesses of monarchical power had devised a variety of physical means of oppression. The democratic republics of the present day have rendered it as entirely an affair of the mind as that will, which it is intended to coerce. I see. Okay. So yes, the democratic society has sovereignty over your brain. It is. Yeah, okay. So, simple point here. The monarchy physically can constrain you, the democracy can intellectually constrain you. Under the absolute sway of an individual despot, the body was attacked in order to subdue the soul, and the soul escaped the blows which were directed against it and rose superior to the attempt. But such is not the course adopted by tyranny in democratic republics. There the body is left free, and the soul is enslaved. The sovereign can no longer say, "You shall think as I do on pain of death," But he says, you are free to think differently from me and to retain your life, your property, and all that you possess. But if such be your determination, you are henceforth an alien among your people. You may retain your civil rights, but they will be useless to you, for you will never be chosen by your fellow citizens if you solicit their suffrages, and they will affect to scorn you if you solicit their esteem. You will remain among free men, but you will be deprived of the rights of mankind. Your fellow creatures will shun you like an impure being, and those who are most persuaded of your innocence will abandon you too, lest they should be shunned in their turn. Go in peace. I have given you your life, but it is an existence incomparably worse than death. Okay, that's quite extreme. That boils it down quite well. How many of you, I mean, if you don't relate to anything he's saying at all, I am afraid you are an extremely boring person who lives to oppress all those who have interesting thoughts, and yet you may not even know it. And, I mean, this really nails it, I think. So much for the majority being so great. Monarchical institutions have thrown an odium upon despotism. Let us beware lest democratic republics should restore oppression and should render it less odious and less degrading in the eyes of the many by making it still more onerous to the few. Works have been published in the proudest nations of the old world, expressly intended to censure the vices and deride the follies of the times. La Bruyere inhabited the palace of Louis XIV, yes, when he composed his... It's late in the day, give me a break. All right. When he composed his chapter upon the great, and Moliere criticized the courtiers in the very... courtiers, in the very pieces which were acted before the court. But the ruling power of the United States is not to be made game of. The smallest reproach irritates its sensibility, and the slightest joke which has any foundation in truth renders it indignant. From the style of its language to the more solid virtues of its character, everything must be made the subject of encomium. No writer, whatever be his eminence, can escape from the tribute of adulation to his fellow citizens. The majority lives in the perpetual practice of self-applause, and there are certain truths which the Americans can only learn from strangers or from experience. That's so real. That's so true. I feel like I observe things that just, well, a lot of people, like, there's so many things you can observe that will never be reciprocated from another person, at least not, so vocally, without a sort of private correspondence or something like that. But certainly we feel every day kind of like we have to keep certain observations quiet and to ourselves, lest we suffer social consequences. Now, there's, of course, an enormous range of what that could possibly compose, what those observations could impose. Some would be, they could be anything. It's not just necessarily stuff that are truly and totally infamous and dangerous, but just other things that come with no social benefit and do not animate the society as a whole. If great writers have not at present existed in America, the reason is very simple, given in these facts. There can be no literary genius without freedom of opinion, and freedom of opinion does not exist in America. The Inquisition has never been able to prevent a vast number of anti-religious books from circulating in Spain. The empire of the majority succeeds much better in the United States, since it actually removes the wish of publishing them. Unbelievers are not to be met with in America, but, to say the truth, there is no public organ of infidelity. Attempts have been made by some governments to protect the morality of nations by prohibiting licentious books. In the United States, no one is punished for this sort of works, but no one is induced to write them. Not because all the citizens are immaculate in their manners, but because the majority of the community is decent and orderly. In these cases, the advantages derived from the exercise of this power are unquestionable, and I am simply discussing the nature of the power itself. This irresistible authority is a constant fact, and its judicious exercise is an accidental occurrence. Okay, that's the end of that passage, and he says more. He has a lot to say about the tyranny of the majority, but I thought that was especially good. And, I imagine that this is going to be the first YouTube video I kind of put out publicly. And it's informal, it's imperfect, but I think it's a good basis for framing one's approach to um, an intellectual presence online. So there's a lot one could say about how that relates to internet discourse and things of that nature. Um, but namely, I would point out in this culture of being outraged, of being offended, that has been going on for a long time now, over a decade. Um, it and I guess in a real sense, it's been going on since America was founded. But it's especially pertinent. How many people take issue with something because um, it seems to have departed from majority opinion or what seems right or what people think is okay? How many people point out, that's a little weird, or like, whoa, what the heck is wrong with you? Nobody does that, man. Who thinks that? What? So we live in an era where in the developed societies, democracy, the rhetoric of it, the values of it have taken over everything. And everybody now it judges things insofar as it seems to be appropriate for the majority. This is insane. This is crazy. This is wrong. This results in a shit culture. That's my main point. That becomes dog shit. And there are some people out there, dissidents of all kinds, of different stripes and backgrounds. And even I find that they tend to embody some kind of version of this. They still, even if they dissent from the majority opinion, they dissent because it doesn't seem to encapsulate what they believe to be appropriate for the majority of a community. And even the warring factions in our politics, the two big ones too, these most explicitly attempt to claim the consensus of the majority. Of course, they do that because Democrats and Republicans have to win elections and whatnot. But that results in a culture where every value, even the people who could not hope to capture the majority of an electorate, everybody is like, I actually represent the majority. I actually represent, you know, it, it, rea- reactionaries, people who are very much against modernity will say, well, the majority of human history has agreed with me. The communists and workers of the world will say, well, this is the majority of the unspoken working class, yada yada. These are not the opinions of the ruling classes who have manipulated and just distracted from what is the true majority of opinion in society. Everybody does this, um, and I think Tocqueville is right. This is an oppressive thing. It's not good, and it hinders culture. So that's my point for now. I hope you got something out of it.